Well, the Kenyan economy is facing serious headwinds, some of them globally, others they're just local. And so the question has always been, how do we keep the economy going, and how do we ensure that we maintain economic growth, which according to the National Treasury is supposed to reach about 6.5% this year. Well, from inflation to the high cost of energy and to the high cost of servicing, our national debt, these are some of the issues that are dragging our economy down. And this, of course, is having ripple effect on many other sectors of the economy. And so the question is, what is the status of our economy today? Well, joining us is Peter Mashari. He's the CEO of Jijenge Credit. He will be helping us to navigate through this program and, of course, help us with more of insight on what is really happening. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Peter. First of all, give us an update on where are we? How is our economy doing? Are we sailing in safe waters, or what's happening?
Thank you, O'Brien, for inviting me. And once again, thank you to our viewers for watching KBC. The current state of the Kenyan economy is picking up. We can say it's been low, but currently it's trying to pick up. And we are going against several external and international shocks. That is, the dollar is quite, the exchange rate for the shilling against the dollar, it's quite high. The cost of fuel is also quite high, and the Ukraine war is still on. But generally, as a country, we are resilient, we are hopeful, and I believe the technocrats at the Ministry of Finance, CBK, Treasury are not sleeping. They are burning the midnight oil to help mitigate all that.
When you look at what we are calling the internal and external shocks, from the war in Ukraine to the rising cost of fuel, now to those are some of the international or exogenous shocks that we are dealing with. But when you look at internally, we have the issues around debt servicing, the issues of recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, among many others. Which one do you think are having more impact on the Kenyan economy?
Well, we can say it's been a spillover from COVID, because COVID had a major shock locally and internationally, because most of the businesses were shut down, most government operations were also shut down. And that one impacted negatively on the government in terms of revenue, because the main source of revenue for government is tax and debt. So during COVID, tax collection was bare minimum. And then we had a drought. Immediately after COVID, we had elections, then there was a drought, then we have the issue of the Ukraine war, and the high cost of fuel, which is also being instigated by OPEC, which controls the oil supply in the world and prices. And
look, we are just coming from a debilitating COVID-19 pandemic, which brought the world economy almost to its knees. And do you still feel that we are still going through the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, or would you say that we have gotten to a point where now we can say that we have recovered confidently?
Well, we've not yet recovered from COVID, because the effects were long-term, and most manufacturers have not yet restored maximum productivity. Like vehicle manufacturers in Japan and other countries, they had to restore maximum vehicle production, and it will take time, because as they try to restore normalcy, there are other external shocks that are coming on board and affecting the speed and rate at which the recovery would have been fast. But all said and done, Kenyans are resilient. We are people we are hardworking, we are focused, And we also put God ahead of everything, and the believers will succeed.
At the end of the day, we are prayerful nation.
Yes, yes.
That's what we say.
Yes, yeah.
But do you feel that, and I know that, Professor Jogon Ndongo, the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary, is very deliberate, to steer the Kenyan economy on the right path. And one of the government's key target is to reduce our national debt from about 9 trillion shillings to manageable levels, so that we also reduce our servicing, our debt servicing expenses. Do you see concrete steps, towards doing this?
Well, concrete steps are definitely there, because the team at Treasury is a competent team. However, the external shocks, especially the issue of the dollar, is really impacting negatively on their speedy recovery. Because as at yesterday, the national debt crossed the 10 trillion mark.
Yeah.
And that definitely means that we'll definitely have to go deeper into our pockets and service the debts. And definitely the cost of servicing, or the money that is required to service the debts, must come from within our borders, either through tax or we borrow, either internally or externally.
And this explains why, the government, has been very aggressive, in terms of reforming our tax administration systems, as well as, coming up with new taxation measures. For example, from July, workers, the government implemented the housing levy. And we have also seen, a lot of reforms, going or happening at the Kenya Revenue Authority to try and align our tax systems to boost the level of collections. And so this is, of course, going to be painful, in the medium term, but of course, in the long term, we are likely to bear fruits. But the question then comes, how then do we do all these? Do we come up with new taxation measures, become more aggressive in tax collections, but at the same time we ensure that we do not hurt an already hurting population?
That's a very good question, because experts always say that you should not tax the residents of a country into poverty. And it calls for a lot of balancing, a very delicate balancing act, so that as you increase the tax collection, you should not hurt the
taxpayer.
The taxpayer, or rather the hen that lays the golden egg. And therefore, the best solution is to widen the tax bracket, so that the people who are easier to tax from can be saved from further taxation. And instead we widen the tax and tax as many people as possible. And that one calls for very innovative methods, very innovative ways, and a lot of research, so that you can identify the areas, the grey areas where tax or taxation has not been effected. Yes.
And the issue of inflation, it continues to be a major challenge, and we have seen, the National Treasury, trying to steer the economy in a bid to bring down the level of inflation in this country. And we know that, the policy band is between 5.7%, 5.5% to 7.5%, but now it is well above this. We are looking at 9%. And so are you convinced that the measures that the National Treasury has put in place, are working towards reducing inflation?
Definitely, yes. The measures that have been put in place to manage and control inflation are in top gear. One of the main measures that the governments use to control inflation is by increasing the interest rates, so that there's less money that is lent out to businesses and to individuals. As at yesterday, the interest rate, or rather this week, the interest rate was averaging 18%.
18%.
18% per annum. And therefore, it's a good measure to control the effects of inflation. Because if it is not managed, it can go overboard, especially because of the external shocks like cost of fuel and most of the other goods like electricity has also gone up, and therefore all those effects are pushing inflation up.
And when you look at the performance of the Kenyan shilling, it has been on a downward spiral, it's receiving major beatings from major global currencies, from the euro, Japanese yen, to the US dollar, to the Chinese yuan. The shilling, is losing significant ground. Is there anything that we can do to stem a further decline of the Kenyan shilling?
There are measures that can be taken, and the first one is maybe to reduce or rather to improve our balance of payment, because ideally the shilling gets weaker against the dollar because of we import more. Most of the things that are imported, the policymakers need to come up with a policy or develop a measure or a way whereby we can empower and spur manufacturing, local manufacturing, or even spur more agricultural exports. And I believe the government is on it. I know the Minister of Agriculture is trying his best to improve the agricultural segment and sector, so that we can have more exports. We can export more coffee, we can export more tea, we can export more nuts, macadamia, all the other, or anything that we're able to export after consuming locally, that should be encouraged, so that we are able to reduce our balance of payment. And once that one is done, our shilling will be very strong against the dollar. Then the other issue is to do what some of other African countries are doing, which I think that one could be very tricky. That is joining or encouraging other currencies, so that we stop over-reliance on the dollar, so that we don't buy all our imports using the dollar. We can use Japanese yen. Other countries have joined the BRICS. Other countries have proposed to we have even suggested a different measure or method of purchasing oil or petroleum products by doing government to government, so that most of the currencies that are involved there, the dollar is we use more of the Kenyan currency as opposed to the dollar.
But so the question that is coming out, when you float those kind of ideas, whereby you're trading in local currencies, is so what are the other countries, for example, Saudi Arabia, where the government entered into a government to government oil purchase deal. What would Saudi Arabia do with the Kenyan shilling? And what would we do with yes, for us we may buy their product, which is oil. But what would they do with the Kenyan shilling?
Well, those are now the areas that we need to bring on board research and find out whether they consume Kenyan tea. We can sell the Kenyan tea to them, or coffee, in exchange of the fuel. So those are areas that we need to do a lot of.
Can we also explore the option of barter trade? Yeah. Whereby they give us oil,
yes,
we give them tea,
yes,
we give them coffee.
Yeah. Or we export labor.
For example.
Yeah.
So what we need, are we really putting this kind of ideas into action?
Well, I believe there must be someone who maybe is listening to our ideas, and they are being put in place, so that all those challenges that we are facing as a country are mitigated.
look, when you talk about debt repayment, and this is something that you touched on. When you look at the year 2016, Kenya spent about 216 billion shillings to repay debt. In the last 9 months to March this year, Kenya spent about 817 billion Kenya shillings to repay debt. And this is even way above the recurrent expenditure of the government, which was about 600 and something billion shillings. And so, debt repayment is really grabbing a significant portion of our revenue. Is there any way then we can renegotiate our debt position with our creditors to ensure that we don't put undue pressure on the Kenyan shilling?
That's a very good question. Definitely there are ways of reducing the pressure on the debt repayment policies. And I think the major challenge is the weakening of the Kenyan shilling, because any time the shilling depreciates by 1 shilling, because all our debts we are paying them in dollars, the installments increase by that 1 shilling. So if our dollar was, we had a loan of $1 million, and the shilling depreciates by 1 shilling, so that debt goes up by 1 million. Therefore, I think the best thing would be to look at the interest rates. We need to shy away and run away from expensive debts. And the best way is to number one,
commercial loans.
Yes, we need to renegotiate the repayment period, the terms, and even seek for lower interest rates. And also see whether you can get grants where we are given a moratorium, a window, a repayment window of maybe 3 years, so that within those 3 years we have a breathing space to be able to generate more income and hope that the dollar goes down, because once the Kenya shillings get stronger, we also save on the loan installment amounts. Yes.
The other thing is the fact that a lot of this debt was borrowed for us to invest in major infrastructural projects. You have the SGR, you have the ring roads, you have an expanded port of Mombasa, you have the Lamu port. We also saw the expansion of Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, Kisumu Airport, Malindi, Mombasa. And so have you also sat down and say, look here, I mean, we invested in all these projects, but are we putting better utilization of these projects? If it is a question of investment in agriculture, have we improved our agricultural production? If it is a question of our ports, have we improved efficiency, at the ports of Mombasa, at the ports of Lamu, so that we ensure that we attract more business?
That's a very good question. It also came up yesterday during the Auditor General's report, and she was proposing that each debt that we have as a country should be tied to the project it did, so that we're able to do that analysis, so that we're able to identify and say whether that debt or that project is sustaining itself and it's generating income to repay the debt, or how is it being managed. For example, if we took a debt for the SGR, that particular debt should be tied to the SGR. So that whatever income is generated, first of all, it's directed to repay that debt, and then we're able to identify the shortfall. And it's a very good way of auditing projects, because we will be able to zero in and identify the projects that are serving Kenyans and projects that are not serving Kenyans, and therefore we can make a first decision on how to reorganize our finances and support maybe projects that need to be completed so that they can generate some income or serve Kenyans.
You see, when you look, for example, and I like that you're talking about, SGR. And according to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, they are saying that standard gauge railway revenue increased by 6.4% to 15.3 billion shillings in the 12 months leading to December 2022. And so then do we audit and ask ourselves, when you talk about revenue increasing to 15 billion shillings, on the SGR, is that the best that SGR can do? Is there anything else then we need to do to increase the haulage of cargo on the SGR so that it can realize more profit and so it can repay its own loan? Are you convinced that we are carrying out this kind of analysis?
Well, we can say that as from yesterday, I think after that question was floated to the Director Generals of various state corporations, they will need to reanalyze and find out, like the question you're asking, is the SGR serving us optimally? Is it generating as much revenue as it should? Because SGR was supposed to go past Naivasha. Mm-hmm. The question we would ask is, was it meant to, is Naivasha the end of was it supposed to be the end point? Or once the goods are removed from the port, what are they being dropped at Naivasha?
Supposed to go all the way up to Webuye.
Exactly, so that
and then from Webuye it goes to Uganda.
Exactly,
from Uganda it goes to DRC Congo.
That is now where we would derive maximum use of the SGR. You should be able to go and deliver goods to as much near the point of use as possible. Because if it is a fuel that is being taken to Uganda by SGR, the SGR should go all the way to Uganda and maybe serve other tertiary towns within the country, either Kisumu or Eldoret, and so that it hives off the load and the cost of repairs for the main highway, and it goes to SGR. Mm-hmm. Yes.
You see, and I like the fact that you're bringing in the issue of, extending the SGR so that we can realize, the full benefits of SGR. I mean, the whole plan was to ensure that, once the goods are evacuated from the port of Mombasa, they are taken directly to Busia, where now, they cross over to Uganda to serve the Ugandan market, Burundi, Rwanda, as well as the DRC market. But this is not happening. So you still have a situation whereby a lot of goods are, is evacuated from the port of Mombasa, and then the termination point is at Naivasha, whereby now you also have to think about how now to evacuate your goods from Naivasha dry port now to the other destinations in the region. And so this is becoming a headache for investors. And so then should we then start having a conversation as to how then do we raise enough resources then to extend SGR to its original destination?
Definitely we'll have to explore either do we need to get resources to complete the railway, or do we need to get public-private partnership so that we can reduce the over-reliance on debts to do the extension? And all those are cards that should be put on the table so that we look at the best possible option that will not hurt Kenyans. And therefore, we as a country, we really need to balance so many things. Do a feasibility study on the viability of extending the railway. Also do another study on the financial options that we can take that will serve Kenyans. And therefore settle on one, which should be the best possible option. Yeah.
And now the conversation that is taking place within government circles, and this point was buttressed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, PBO, where they are advising the National Treasury now, instead of borrowing more to invest in infrastructure, and now to borrow more to repay Kenya's maturing debt. And so, we're likely to see less investment in new infrastructural projects, but a lot of our budget will go towards, repaying our debt. So what exactly then does this mean? And bearing in mind that infrastructure development is is a major driver of economic growth.
Well, it's a good proposal because technically it means that all the projects, all the investments that had been financed or that had borrowed funds should be completed so that we get the optimal use of them. And the faster we complete those projects, the better, because we might end up paying loans for projects that are not complete. Mm-hmm. And that one will be a looming disaster because we will continue in that rat race whereby we borrow to pay a debt. And the project that was meant to be financed by that debt is not serving anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is it is high time, number one, we took an audit of all our debts. Mm-hmm. And then number two, we undertake an audit of all projects whereby if we borrowed money for this project, we need to do an audit to discover or to find out whether the project was completed. Mm-hmm. If it is not completed, then what's happened? Mm-hmm. And then how do we ensure that we complete this project? This is not happening, or is it happening?
Well, what I know for sure is that, and from the Auditor General's report, there is no new project that is running. I will need to look at it again and find out whether the projects that were implemented in yesteryears and the ones that we had borrowed funds for, were they completed, especially the roads. I know there are some roads that we had borrowed, like the Momo Road. Are they complete? Because there's no need of, it's like borrowing money to put up a flat or an apartment. Then you leave it at halfway and you had borrowed. And then you stay for 2-3 years without progressing. That apartment becomes run down because the weather will ravage on it. So many, the loss will be unsurmountable.
So you're looking to have what we call cost overruns.
Exactly, or white projects.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you have now to spend more money to rehabilitate the same apartment.
Yes.
And then, of course, because of inflation, the cost of borrowing will be up.
Yes.
And so that's a challenge of, having projects that are not complete. But let's now bring in the issue of borrowing. And I know that, you're in the space of credit financing. Mm. How has this impacted the cost of credit? You talked about the average cost of a loan now averaging about 18%, and this is likely to keep away borrowers because of the high interest rate. Mm-hmm. So how is the credit market impacted by the ongoing cost of living issues?
Well, the credit market has been impacted partly negatively because very few people are borrowing also. However, that should be the aim of the policymakers, so that we have less funds or less money out there in the market because of the high inflation rate. Mm-hmm. However, we should encourage new businesses, new startups, so that with the new businesses and new expansions, we're able to lend and gradually spur more businesses to operate and spur business growth. If that segment is left unattended, by and large, we might end up now collecting less tax because there are fewer businesses that are operating, fewer businesses that are borrowing for expansion, and therefore the tax collection margins are affected. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what measures should the government put in place? And I'm talking about the central bank as well as the National Treasury. Mm-hmm. What measures should they put in place to ensure that, the cost of credit is maintained. I know we tried, interest caps. It never worked, and so the market was left open. Now you're talking about, the cost of credit, the average, being 18%. So this is likely to have a major impact, on development, because a lot of businesses are likely to find it tough to borrow. Have you also seen a rise in cases of non-performing loans?
Well, non-performing loans are definitely on the rise, because if you look at the latest CBK report, I think it was released 2 weeks ago. It was saying 60% of loans are not being paid. 60% of the total loans are not being paid. And that
so you only have
shows,
40%?
Yeah, that is being serviced. And that clearly shows that the business segment is not on the right path. Then on the part of interest, the high interest rates that are being offered by the banks, my recommendation would be that the government reduces its borrowing, local borrowing, because a bank would prefer to lend to the government, which is less risky, less cumbersome, less paperwork, than to lend to an individual who is high risk, more paperwork, more monitoring, and has very uncertain. And during this time, business survival is very uncertain. Therefore, those are now the two competing forces. Yeah.
And I was going through the central bank report where it was saying that credit to the private sector registered some marginal growth in the period to June, whereby it's registered a growth of 12.2%, and this compares it was 13% compared to 12.2% in May, which means that Kenyans are still willing to borrow, so that they can expand their businesses and so much. But also now you're bringing the issue of non-repayment of loans. And then on the other hand, banks are becoming more concerned lending to people because of the high rates of non-performing loans. So then how then do we strike a balance? Because at the end of the day, the private sector is the key driver of economic growth, and so when the private sector is not borrowing, then there's going to be a challenge, when it comes to economic growth. So how then do we ensure that there is credit supply to the private sector, and then there is credit repayment from the private sector?
Number one is what I've mentioned earlier, that if the government reduces its borrowing locally, there will be a lot of money to lend to the public, and definitely that one would mean that it will spur economic growth. Interest rates would reduce marginally, and therefore, and even the tax bracket would widen, because if you're borrowing to increase production, then it means that you'll pay more tax. If you're buying to open, or rather to expand, it will mean that you'll employ more Kenyans, and tax collection would increase. And my proposal is we reduce government borrowing locally. They go to foreign, they put more emphasis on foreign debt or foreign borrowing. They encourage MSMEs to grow, to expand, to get cheaper loans, and even to employ more, because MSMEs are also the highest employer. Apart from the government, the other second group that employs the highest number of Kenyans is MSMEs. So that now the wider the businesses open up, or the more the businesses open up, the wider the tax collection bracket. Yes.
You see, during the last meeting, the Central Bank of Kenya through the Monetary Policy Committee, they raised the benchmark rates to 10.5%. But on the other hand, we have seen, the rate of inflation easing to 6.7%. From 7.3% in July. And so, on one hand, the cost of living is improving, but on the other hand, the central bank is keen on retaining the benchmark rate at 10%. What are they trying to do? Aren't they supposed then to also ease the benchmark rate so that they can inspire, more credit to the private sector?
All I can say is that CBK is doing the right thing, and it's on track, because they have to balance maintaining slightly high interest rates at 10.5%, and also managing the rate of inflation. And rate of inflation is being spurred, or is being brought about by the high cost of goods. So the excess money in the market needs to be mopped up by increasing the interest rates, and reducing the local borrowing within the market. So that within 1 or 2 months, once that one eases, now CBK can start reducing the rates gradually.
So as we wind up this interview, what advice do you have, for people who are struggling to make it? What are the tips that they should employ? Number one, to keep their businesses afloat, and number two, to tap into new customers.
Thank you. Number one is to ensure that you come up with a very strict cost control measures. Ensure that you have a budget. You're able to track any coin that you spend vis-a-vis any coin that you generate or any income that you get. So that now from the budget that you've developed, you strictly follow that. We should, at personal level, avoid impulse buying. We should avoid buying things that are on offer. And we also need to go back to and look at our expenses, because there are things that have increased. But very few people have noted those small increases, like the cost of fuel, cost of electricity, and therefore we need to readjust. Be it a business, be it an individual, we need to readjust ourselves to fit into those budgets, so that generally and as an overview, we live within our means. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Anything else?
Well, what I can say is that Kenyans are resilient. We hope for the best, and we are going to overcome. It's a matter of time, then everything will stabilize, and we look forward for the best.
Very good. Yeah. Peter Wachira, thank you very much for finding time to be with us this morning, and it's almost now coming to midday. Otherwise, your time is highly appreciated.
Thank you.
Very good. Peter Wachira is the CEO of Jijenge Credit, helping us to understand and to evaluate the status of our economy as we stand. The fact of the matter is times are tough. But the fact of the matter is the government is also doing something to try and ease the burden on the cost of living. Well, we have been watching us live from Broadcasting House. This has been Base Check. We started the hour off with the Nairobi Declaration and, of course, tracking the third critical documents. And we are wrapping it up with a look at Kenya's economic status. Well, my name is O'Brien Kimani. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Kurunzi Mashinani is coming up with her lead. Stay right here. And, of course, at 1 o'clock, do stay tuned for our lunchtime bulletin. Have a good afternoon.